You're listening to The Signal Daily.
Hello, I'm Manaswini, your host for the Signal Daily podcast. This is the episode for 26th April 2024. Today, for the first story, we dive into Meta's earnings report, what is working out for it and what's not. And in our second segment, we look at how the plastic treaty discussion in Canada are progressing. What are the anticipated roadblocks? And what kind of policies do we need to have for effective plastic waste management? Our guest for this episode is Suneel Pandey, Director and Senior Fellow at the Energy and Resources Institute. Stay tuned till the end of this episode. Meta just turned in its earnings report for the first quarter and, well, it didn't receive a warm response despite its revenue increase. So let's look at the report card. The company that owns WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram revealed its earnings report for the January to March period. And the report showed that the company's revenue rose by 27% to $36.5 billion during the first quarter of 2024, exceeding a tiny bit above analyst expectations of $36.16 billion. And earnings per share also more than doubled to $4.71, surpassing expectations on Wall Street of $4.32. Its profit was $12.4 billion, more than double the $5.7 billion from a year back. And by the way, at the time of recording this podcast, only Meta had posted its earnings. Other major tech companies were yet to release their financial results. However, by the time you listen to this episode, Google and Microsoft will have also released their earnings reports. But anyway, coming back to Meta, it's clearly had a pretty decent start to the year, a decent turnaround from the rut of 2022. And in my opinion, it sort of validates Zuckerberg's promise on the year of efficiency for 2023, where Meta saw a lot of cost-cutting measures. But a few things that are bugging investors that sent its shares tumbling by 15%. First, a weaker than expected third quarter revenue and earnings forecast combined with higher capital expenditures. So like most other tech companies, Meta has pivoted its plans towards artificial intelligence since. In fact, just last week, the company rolled out Meta AI in response to OpenAI, which will see the integration of its AI-powered smart assistant software across its apps, be it in search bars or chats or anywhere else. In fact, it's already happening with WhatsApp. But it is looking at a higher capital expenditures to fuel investments into these new AI products and, most importantly, to have the infrastructure needed to build them. We are talking about computing resources and AI hardware like graphics processing units, servers, data centers, etc. And the company estimates that the capital expenditures will be in the $35 billion to $40 billion range, higher than its earlier estimates of $30 to $37 billion. At the same time, though, its AR/VR unit, which is the Reality Labs, is bleeding cash to chase Zuckerberg's vision of metaverse, which is a direction he had taken 2 years back before rerouting it to AI-first approach. And Reality Labs is costing the company billions of dollars, and it has very little to show. I mean, metaverse is as good as dead, and with that, Zuckerberg's VR dream is not as hot as it used to be. Although the Ray-Ban smart glasses have found a decent response resuscitating hopes for its AR plans. But really, despite so much money being funneled into AI and Reality Labs, most of Meta's business really comes from advertising. So for now, Zuckerberg wants investors to trust the process, but he's going to have to show something concrete very soon. For our second segment, we are going to bring you deep dives on stories from the world of technology, business, policy, and anything that leaves you with food for thought. It's nearly impossible to imagine a world without plastic now, isn't it? Sure, personally, some of you may have inculcated a habit of reducing plastic from your everyday lives, but you can't entirely get rid of it. Plastic is all pervasive, it seems. Heck, even human placentas have been found with microplastics. When the first synthetic plastic was invented in the 20th century, it was a pure novelty. It had a great selling point. It could be molded into any shape, from containers to furniture, and most importantly, it could be mass-produced. And so this invention ignited a revolution in mass manufacturing and consumer culture. By 2022, global plastic production reached a staggering 403 million metric tons, and by 2023, the global plastics market was valued at $712 billion. But why am I talking about plastic at all? Well, currently, world leaders have gathered in Canada for the fourth session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to work on an international treaty to address plastic pollution. And of course, you don't need me to tell you that plastic pollution has become a global problem. But still, let me paint you a picture that shows the extent of this problem. According to the UN, every day, the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic are dumped into the world's oceans, rivers, and lakes. Every year, 19 to 23 million tons of plastic waste leaks into aquatic ecosystems, polluting lakes, rivers, and seas. This not only degrades entire ecosystems, but plastics also accounts for 3.4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. According to OECD, about 3/4 of total plastic production ends up in landfills or the environment. This is from a 2022 report. And only 9% of the plastic ever produced has been recycled, and 19% has been incinerated. Nearly 2/3 of plastic waste comes from plastics with lifetimes of under 5 years, with 40% coming from packaging, and 12% from consumer goods, and 11% from clothing and textiles. So the UN wants to bring in a legally binding agreement by the end of this year to address this crisis. An agreement that will look at the entire life cycle of plastics, from production to usage and disposal. If successful, this would be the first ever plastic treaty. But there are plenty of roadblocks. I mean, the first big issue that leaders are squabbling about is whether to do the basic minimum or to do something outstanding. I mean, as is the case with most environmental treaties, countries are viciously divided on production limits and phase-outs. If we go by the previous sessions of this meeting, for example, there were more stalemates than any actual advances. While some nations do want to regulate plastic production, at least 4 out of 5 of the biggest petrochemical producing countries, such as Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China, had obstructed the process, arguing that treaties should focus more on tracking and recycling waste than reducing production. And in this, they had the backing of the petrochemical industry. Although interestingly, the US, which is also a petro state, was on the other side of it. But I also called up Suneel Pandey, Director and Senior Fellow at TERI, the Energy and Resource Institute, who is leading a research team in pollution control and waste management, to get his thoughts on this issue. I asked him what would be the effective approach between cutting down production and recycling. What has been India's stand on this? And lastly, factoring in global value chains and trade in plastics, to have an effective treaty on plastic pollution, what should be the approach for waste management? Let's listen to what he had to say.
The plastic pollution is difficult to address as it's a huge amount of plastic globally generated, more as a packaging waste. And also because of the fact that the packaging plastic many times contains a lot of chemical additives. So when the plastic is collected, say for recycling, the product which comes out is a downcycled plastic product. The low-value plastic is not collected at all, and that often ends up at the landfill or in the water body. And thereby, it becomes a problem because at the landfill, many times it's burned, causing air pollution. And when the plastic packaging is disposed in the water body is connecting to the oceans or seas. From there, the plastic goes to the coastal waters and contributes to the marine litter. And marine litter actually has become the most debated problem after the climate change. If you look at latest UNEP data, it says that every second a truckload of plastic waste is disposed on the land. So that's the seriousness of the problem. And the treaty, if you see, it's true that many of the large business houses are not agreeing to this treaty. So what I believe is a phased approach in this regard would be good. One needs to look at ways to reduce plastic packaging. One needs to basically make the plastic packaging more recyclable and more environmentally friendly so that they can be recycled, causing least pollution. And also, side by side, one needs to also look at alternatives to plastic packaging. In India, in July, we had phased out, in July 2022, we had phased out certain plastic packaging or plastic cutlery or single-use plastic items. The phase-out has not been fully successful because of the fact that many of the small vendors still are forced to use such kind of material because they operate in a very price-sensitive market. And for them, it is not easy to transition to more costly alternatives. So one needs to look at the market mechanism, either by government or by industries, how to support these vendors on ground, basically to facilitate them to transition to alternatives. In India, we have started, if you look at our plastic waste management rules, there's a provision for extended producer responsibility. That mandates producers and manufacturers basically to collect the plastic waste and also recycle, and thereby get credit for recycling. That in near future would certainly look at enhanced recycling. But side by side, we also need to basically look at reducing the whole demand of plastic packaging.
Seems like plastic pollution can't have an either-or solution. Phase-outs will have to go hand in hand with recycling. If you like listening to The Signal Daily, please show us some support. Rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We'd love to hear what you have to say about this podcast. So feel free to shoot an email at hello@thesignal.co. The episode was researched and written by Shorbori, produced by me, Manaswini, edited by Venkat, Ananth, mastered and mixed by Yash Hirave. You can catch this podcast every morning on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Prime Music, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are thesignal.co on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.